I don't know how to start this. How do you introduce this sort of thing? Someone help me, please God, someone help me. Okay, so basically this is a new format where I'm going to be talking about some films that I've seen for the month that just can't fit into something like a video essay or a full long review because those take forever to make. But I feel like the vast majority of the films that I do actually watch, I just never get to mention despite me wanting to talk about them. So basically this will just be me breaking down some of the films that I found interesting for good or bad reasons that I've seen each month, and then I'll just update this on a monthly basis. And just a quick thing before we start, you're going to be able to look in the description of this video and see time codes for the different films that I talk about. So if you want to skip some films or skip to some films, you just go do that. So this month is obviously for August, and I'm going to start with the good with Masaki Kobayashi's Hymn to a Tired Man. Now, don't be surprised if you haven't heard of this film because it is exceedingly rare. And I didn't actually realize this when I went to go and see a 35mm screening of it at my local art theater. And then when I came back and I used the site Letterboxd, which kind of rates films, go check it out. It had 15 views, and one of those was also from someone I went to see the film with. So basically this is a very, very unknown film from one of my favorite and the famed Japanese director Masaki Kobayashi. You might know him famously for directing Harakiri, but he also directed the Human Condition trilogy, which I absolutely love, and I basically consider an essential for film, but especially for Japanese film. And he also directed the fantastic J-horror film Kwaidan, which is one of the most spectacularly colorful and beautiful films I've ever seen. But regardless, I am extremely blessed to have seen A, this film in general, because it just doesn't really have a proper release, and 2, actually in its original 35mm format. And in saying that, this film is a borderline masterpiece. I wouldn't put it up there with something like Harakiri or The Human Condition, but it stands above basically every other Kobayashi film besides that I've seen. Kobayashi still deals with a lot of his anti-war themes, and there's actually quite a few flashbacks to the Second World War, but for the most part the film actually is taking place in domestic Japan in the late 60s, which is a really interesting divergence from his samurai films like Samurai Rebellion, Harakiri, or Inn of Evil, which should be retitled Inn of Shit, because it's not very good. Kill me. Regardless, check this film out if you ever have the opportunity to. I'm absolutely blown away that I actually got to see this, and actually going into it, I didn't realize how rare it was, so I'm really, really glad I got to see this. Okay, next film in the good category is Eva 2.22, or Evangelion Rebuild 2. I don't know, Anno, get your fucking title straight. I'm gonna be very brief with this because it's fucking anime. That shit's cancer, but I just wanted to mention this kind of briefly because I'm soon gonna be releasing a very, very long in the works video essay on Neon Genesis Evangelion, the infamous anime mecha series that is one of the more divisive pieces of media to have ever existed, I think. And basically, if you don't really know about this Rebuild series, the original creator basically has been making, and is still in the process actually, of making film remakes of his original series, but now actually diverging from the initial storyline. And I will be talking about Eva 3.33 a little later in this video, because that's a strong example of diverging quite a bit from the original narrative. But obviously, considering that this film is in the good category, that I actually do consider this a nice film. It's a really, really welcome change from 1.1, which was just a very, very flat and boring retelling of the original series, and basically reiterates one of my fundamental principles of filmmaking, is that you cannot straight up adapt something from a completely different medium into film. Best example of this is that it literally just takes the first 6 episodes of the TV show, puts it into a 90-minute film, and then expects it to work like that. There's a reason the first 6 episodes were in episodic format, otherwise there would just be a 90-minute film in the first place. It does not work straight up adapting stuff. The other kind of famous example of this, of course, is Shyamalan's The Last Airbender, which tries to compress 20 episodes into a 2-hour film, I think, and just that's why the pacing is all over the place for that, and also 1.1. But luckily for 2.22, it does actually diverge a little bit from the original storyline in a pretty interesting way. The animation's really, really nice, and it's one of the better uses of 3D CG that I've seen. Normally, I absolutely hate it, and a good example of that is in the currently airing Berserk series, which is basically raping the original series and the manga of that, which is really, really sad, basically. But to be honest, I'm not even sure who I would recommend this to, because the people who like 1.11 will not like 3.33, and considering that this sits in the middle of them, it's just a very, very strange film. But yeah, I guess if you like Neon Genesis Evangelion, then sit through 1.11, watch 2.22 because it's actually good, and then decide if you really want to watch 3 because it's just... I'm going into that later, but it's very strange. Howard Hawks' Bringing Up Baby. Amazing film, and I didn't expect this to be as great as it was. Honestly, this is one of the best comedies I have ever seen, hands down, in terms of both structure, acting, writing, and just, generally being able to make you laugh. This film is hilarious. And some of the stunt work in this film is crazy. The whole film kind of revolves around these two main characters having to look after a baby leopard. So for half the film, there's just an actual real-life leopard just running around on set, and it's maddening. I don't know how they actually shot around this. They're obviously really there with this leopard in a lot of these scenes. They're not just using, camera trickery all the time. They do that a tiny bit, but for the most part, the real actors are there with an actual leopard, and it's hilarious. It's an absolutely brilliant screwball comedy. I would highly recommend checking it out. Don't be alarmed that it's from the 1930s. It has really quick pacing. It might grate on a few people because the performance of the main female character is a little bit maddening and kind of screechy, but I didn't really mind it that much. I'm fine with that type of character, so yeah. Obi Obar, The End of Civilization. This is another one where, do not be surprised if you haven't heard of this. This is quite an obscure Polish sci-fi film. The only reason I actually watched this in the first place is because I really like the poster for it, and also because I love Polish sci-fi from what I've seen so far. On the Silver Globe by Zulawski is one of my favorite films of all time. It is just brilliant, and if you haven't seen that already, then really check out that film. I think it's getting remastered in 2K later this year, or it's already come out or something, but visually one of the best looking films I've ever seen as well. Also, I watched a Polish film called Sex Mission. It's exactly what it sounds like, yeah. But just generally, I really like these very bleak, foreign, kind of European sci-fi films, and if you've ever seen the film Dead Man's Letters by Lopushansky, then this is kind of like a mix between that and On the Silver Globe, but the cinematography isn't as kind of green. It's got this very washed out, neon blue look that On the Silver Globe kind of takes on a little bit, but it's definitely not as strong a film as either of those. It's quite a bit weaker than that. It's got some pretty standard, science fiction tropes, like this oppressive regime, the post-apocalypse, which is kind of where the Dead Man's Letters vibes come from. People kind of huddled in poor groups, slowly dying while their hope fades out. But regardless, it still does a fair amount with what it's got, and I'd recommend it if you just enjoy sci-fi, or particularly European sci-fi. Now, onto the bad, and luckily, or not so luckily, there's only one film here because I tend to not try to watch terrible shit. But sadly, I was dragged along by a couple of my friends to the film Sausage Party, and it is really saying something when out of the 3 cinema experiences I've had this year, Batman vs. Superman has been by far the best. This film is unbelievably terrible. Wow. Just wow. I also want to reiterate or just establish that it is almost impossible to offend me on basically any level besides artistic, and this offends me to the maximum extent on an artistic level. This is easily one of the most infantile non-films I think I've ever seen. It really stoops to levels that I didn't actually think existed. This is basically like if Dante reached the 9th circle of hell in Inferno, but then he realized that there was actually a 10th circle of hell, and that just contained a copy of Sausage Party, and also probably some obscure Florentian Pope or something, but regardless. Onto the strange. Now the only strange here, of course, is like I mentioned, Ava 3.33. It's almost a non-sequel to 2 because it's set in such a different period to 2, and I don't want to kind of spoil much there, but I mean, it's almost completely inconsistent from the original. And this trilogy so far, and I know there's a 4th one coming up, but it's kind of a case of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, where Ava 1.11 is just too cold because it's too much of a copy of the original series, so there's no real new creativity there. Ava 2.22 is just right because it breaks away enough from the original series to make it interesting, but not too far to kind of alienate or make things very strange. Ava 3.33 is way too hot. goes into some very, very strange, nonsensical places, but in saying that, I think I still prefer it over 1.1 because it still functions as a film, but just not so much as an Evangelion film. I will admit, though, that the pacing is all over the place, and I know that they're trying to create a sense of confusion, which kind of replicates the main character's confusion throughout the whole film, but far out, I mean, you kind of got to give away some things and explain some stuff. And obviously, Evangelion is kind of known for being labyrinthine and pretty hard to digest, but I feel like it was just a little bit too much to digest immediately, especially considering explanations for what's going on only come like 2/3 of the way through the film. And also, for some reason, there's a large subplot in the film about the main character playing gay piano, which is pretty interesting. Also, the 3D CG really grated on me here a lot more than it did in 2.22. I feel like the usage of it in 2.22 was a lot more restrained than it is here, and while the budget is very, very high, obviously, and it kind of blends in much nicer than a lot of other 3D CG, I'm still just not a huge fan of it as an actual technical style. But overall, I do like that Anno actually is experimenting with some more stuff. I don't know what direction he's going for 4.0 or whatever it's going to be called, so while I'm interested to see that, I just can't really think of how he's going to pull together the same sort of thing he did for End of Eva, which kind of had a similar experience, especially among fans, I think. As far as I'm aware, 3.33 is basically universally hated, but simultaneously has a very, very small, dedicated following who think it's the best, so I don't know. Now, finally onto rewatches, and I think this is one of the more interesting subtopics to go into because rewatching films for me is something that I always want to do for a lot of films, but obviously don't really have the time for most of the time. And I find that every time I rewatch a film, even if I don't like it, or if I do like it, I always find something new in it, and I always change my judgment on it, either quite significantly or even just a little bit. I think it's kind of important really to kind of keep on rewatching some certain films and see how your interpretation of them changes over time as your knowledge of film changes. In saying that, I only saw Masaki Kobayashi's Samurai Rebellion about 6 or 7 months ago, so rewatching it in 35mm was for me basically just seeing it on the big screen, which was an absolutely wonderful experience and an amazing watch, especially on a visual level, seeing it in its original format on this huge plaza, and especially seeing films in a theater with a crowd is just such an enhanced experience. In saying that, the first hour and a bit of this film did grate on me a little bit more than it did the first time I watched it, because the first time I watched it immediately after Bela Tarr's Damnation, which, as you might know, considering Bela Tarr's style, was a very, very slow film, but I kind of got into that rhythm, so I was a lot more comfortable coming into Samurai Rebellion, which had a similar, very, very slow pace. It's still interesting stuff to do with characters. It's great cinematography, but the main issue is it has that very, very Japanese style of static cameras, and while the frames look nice, completely static imagery of just people talking in rooms for an hour kind of setting up the plot does get a little bit grating after a while. In saying that, the payoff is amazing though, and Toshiro Mifune is great as usual. This is probably a little bit worse than I previously remembered, but it's still definitely worth checking out if you like samurai films, or in particular if you like Kobayashi's films. And that's it for the month. Hopefully I'll be able to refine this across different months, because obviously this is the first time me trying out this new format. Give me some feedback on that shit. Tell me what you like, tell me what you don't like. Obviously not very, very visually engaging, but I think the point is it's short, it's sharp, getting that point across, recommending some films, spreading the love, and hopefully you spread the love. Check this shit out, check the other shit out. Bibbidi bang. Goodbye.